So George Kaplan, he's 34 years old, and he used to be the executive assistant for Sean Combs. And he finished his testimony today and said that he saw Sean Combs being violent on one incident on a private plane with other executive members. They were headed to Las Vegas, and he said he heard glass break, and he turned around, and he described seeing Sean Combs over Cassie Ventura with a whiskey glass in his hand. So in that particular instance, he didn't talk specifically about seeing any physical abuse being done, but he also said that Cassie yelled out, "Isn't anybody seeing this?" And then the prosecutor said, "Why didn't you do something?" And he said, "I was 23 years old. I thought I had this great fortune of working with an icon." And he didn't feel like it was his place to step in. He also said no one on that plane stepped in. But he could not give details specifically about any bruises or things that he saw in that particular instance. But then he described seeing Cassie Ventura with her, I believe he described her hand sort of in her head, on her head. He also described another instance where he went to the home of Combs, and Combs called him up on the intercom for something, and he said Cassie Ventura was on the bed and it looked like she had a bruise on her forehead. He said, "I saw her for all of 3 seconds," and then was asked by Combs to go get some lotion and some witch hazel, which he believed must have been for Ventura. And then he said there was a third incident that was kind of the final straw for him as to why he decided to step down as an executive assistant to Combs. And this is when he talked about another girlfriend, Gina, who's been brought up in testimony before. And Kaplan says that he saw Combs throwing a green apple at her, green apples, but wasn't sure if they were real apples or if they were decorative. But again, showing sort of the violent behavior and nature that the prosecution is trying to prove and has been pointing to all along throughout this trial. So I think what was interesting for jurors to hear, though, is for him to talk about sort of this violence that he saw and this rage that he describes Combs having. He said that Combs grew him, as a man, and that he appreciated everything that Combs did for him in terms of inspiring him. He said something to the effect of, "I didn't know I could go to these depths if it weren't for Combs in terms of my work ethic and how important it was to sort of be on point and be about your business." So he really also sort of toward the end on cross-examination talked about the amount of respect and love that he has for Sean Combs even to this day. So it's kind of interesting because he also mentioned that his father was suffering from prostate cancer as the reason he told Sean Combs that he was leaving. But at 34 years old, and then being able to reflect and say I was 23, he really, I felt like for the jurors when I was watching their reaction to him, many times he basically said, like, I have a lot of respect for Sean Combs. And I don't know that he had to say that in court or what he gets out of saying that now. So I thought that was very interesting that he did so much of the sort of other side to what we've been hearing about in court. Scott Muscady, aka Kid Cudi, he corroborated some of what we heard from Cassie Ventura. And he started off by talking about, in 2011, getting a frantic phone call from Cassie Ventura saying, "You gotta come. I'm really concerned, I'm scared, I'm nervous," because she said that Combs found out about their relationship. So in the process of making sure she's safe, he winds up putting her up in a hotel in Los Angeles. And then he said he called Combs and said some choice words to him about wanting to meet up with him. He said that he believed that Combs was at his home and that they were going to have a sort of, real conversation. But he got to his home and he described seeing gifts that were unwrapped and that his dog was locked away in the bathroom and that normally he wouldn't have done that with his dog. So he believed that someone had broken into his house. And he testified that he believed that person was Sean Combs, although there were cameras that he said were turned a different way that normally wouldn't have been turned. So whoever did break in was intentional, again, his testimony about changing things that may have concealed the identity of whoever did that. The defense pointed out that there was no forensic evidence, no video evidence of Sean Combs being a part of that break-in, and then more importantly, that Molotov cocktail that was thrown inside Kid Cudi's Porsche 911. And I think when we think about where is the racketeering, where is the criminal conspiracy, part of the criminal conspiracy lays out arson as one of the elements. So this is possibly being able to show the arson. However, again, the defense made note that there were female fingerprints found when they tested DNA in the car after he reported this to police. So the hard part is getting to the Sean Combs definitely did this, but Cudi throughout his testimony insinuated that it was Combs, and then he said later on that Combs apologized 2 years after he last saw him at the Soho House. People started laughing in the courtroom as he's describing how he first sees Combs. He said, "I entered this room and Combs was looking out of a window with his hands behind his back like a Marvel supervillain." At which point, again, there's some laughter in the courtroom, and knowing that he is a rapper, he does write well. You get this picture of someone that's very calm and almost looking like they're gonna do something. But in the end, he said the conversation went well. They talked about the fact that Cassie Ventura was going back to Combs. And at one point, the defense said, "So basically, she played you." Another moment where everyone's like, "Oh my, this is getting interesting."
His answer to that was?
Yes, basically. So Ventura decides to go back with Combs. Cudi says, "You know what? I want bygones to be bygones." But he mentioned that he wanted it to end because he felt like things were going too far. And he was concerned, he said, not only about his own safety, but Ventura's safety. At the end of that meeting at the Soho House, Kid Cudi described shaking Combs' hand and saying, "But let's talk about my car." And Combs said, "I don't know what you're talking about." Jurors saw the actual cut, the hole in his Porsche, and then they saw the damage done from that Molotov cocktail where the red interior is ruined and it's black and smoky. So the jurors got a real clear picture of what the aftermath looked like from that Molotov cocktail. I think because Kid Cudi played such a big role when you think about that potential arson, which was listed in that civil lawsuit, again, going back to the one that Cassie filed. It seemed like Cudi came in here ready to go. He got out of his car smoking a cigarette. He walked in, focused on that stand. Sean Combs was definitely paying attention, but I really noticed him looking back as Kid Cudi was walking in to sort of see him, and I guess they haven't seen each other in a few years based on Cudi's testimony. But yeah, it's always interesting to see these two people. Same industry. Someone that Kid Cudi says, he respected, and, they were friends at one point. And that was part of the conversation that he said they had at the Soho House. Like, you knew that Cassie was my girl. Why would you do that? And his thing was, well, it was my understanding you guys had broken up. So he didn't see it as such a big deal.
A former makeup artist is expected to testify next.
We might hear more from the makeup artist about what she witnessed in reference to Cassie Ventura, because Ventura testified that there were times where she would try to cover up some of the bruising with makeup.
Yeah.
With each witness, we get a better understanding and picture of what the prosecution is saying, because, these are their witnesses that they're calling. But the defense always has this opportunity to sow doubt into the credibility of each person, or just try to make a case, obviously, for Sean Combs. So it becomes this sort of back and forth, and the details some days are very interesting, fascinating, and honestly sometimes hard to even report on. But I think we just are all waiting to see where's this going? And I hear a lot of people commenting, where's the sex trafficking? Where's the racketeering? And when you hear that a trial is going to last this long, 6 to 8 weeks, it's going to be a bit of a slow, road to the very end. I mean, you just have to wait. I don't know if they have any other sort of bombshell witnesses, but we knew that Cassie Ventura was probably going to be, one of the most important people and impactful people that we would hear from, just based on the indictment and who's involved.